The recent school shooting in Broward County, Florida, is the best argument against gun control. And that's ironic because the left and the media has been using it as a reason for why we need it. So hear me out, because it is an example of how we cannot trust the government to protect us or to always be there. It started with the FBI, who failed. It received multiple tips. A woman called the FBI 3 weeks before the shooter, attacked, and said, quote, that he would, quote, get into a school and just shoot the place up, unquote. The FBI didn't even forward that on to their local office over in Miami to investigate. Nothing happened. That's an absolute failure. Then the sheriff's department failed. They were called to his home 39 times in the 7 years leading up to the shooting. Not once did they charge him with a crime, or in any way question his mental capacity in a way that would prevent him from owning a gun or purchasing a gun. 39 times and they didn't have a reason to charge him, really? That's insane. That's a failure. Then, on the day of the shooting, they showed up, and first we found out that one of the deputies, who was on school grounds at all times, a supposed school resource officer, did not enter the school whilst the shooting was taking place. He just stood there and pointed his gun in random directions while kids were getting blown away. Then we found out that there were 3 other deputies who cowered behind their car and pointed their guns at the building, whilst, again, the kids were getting blown away. The police from another jurisdiction arrived to help out, and they were shocked and appalled, I mean, wouldn't you be, if you arrived, and they're the law enforcement hiding behind a car while the kids are getting blown away. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. The police, then, who, again, from a different jurisdiction entirely, were the first to enter the school. And they were probably too late, and I say that because Cruz, the shooter, wasn't arrested until about a mile away. So it stands to reason that they didn't arrive in time. Not their fault, again, from a different jurisdiction, but it's a failure at all levels. The FBI failed, the sheriff's department failed on multiple occasions. Now, one cop might be a coward. I'll buy that. But 4? I don't believe that 4 people, 4 regular guys who are armed, would stand outside while kids were getting shot at. I don't believe that for a second. There'd be at least one guy who was a hero, who would run in and get involved. But the four law enforcement, the 4 deputies, they didn't. Now, people who sign up for law enforcement, some of them are adrenaline junkies. Others want to be heroes. And frankly, a lot of them are heroes, when it really comes down to it. Obviously, these 4 weren't. But the point is that, for one reason or another, they want to run towards danger. But here they just stood back. It makes no sense to me that you'd have 4 law enforcement officers who would just stand outside and be cowardly. I don't buy it for a second. And that's why I think a stand down order was given by the sheriff. That was one of the reasons. Now, I can't say this for a fact, but there is evidence to back it up. And one of these reasons is, of course, that the 4 law enforcement officers didn't enter. But there's more than that. This isn't a normal sheriff. This isn't what you'd expect if you just went to some random county in America. This is not the sheriff that you would get. This is a very political sheriff. You have photos of him with Bernie Sanders and with Hillary Clinton, the very top tiers of the Democratic Party. He has political aspirations. Big ones. He also is clearly a leftist, clearly a Democrat. And when you're talking about a sheriff, you shouldn't really know the guy's political persuasion. Because you expect him to want to give this idea of safety to everyone in his county. That everyone is protected. And if he's a staunch supporter of one ideology, such as leftism, not everybody feels safe. But with this particular sheriff, he is very strongly political. Now, these pictures were not photoshopped. But just in case you might think that they are, because, frankly, it's pretty hard for me to believe, I have a video to show you of him. Well, he might as well be running for office. It's that over the top. This guy, for all intents and purposes, wants to repeal the Second Amendment. Doesn't believe that it should be there. He's also talked in the past about how we should get rid of the stand your ground law that takes place in Florida. The law that makes sure that people can defend themselves and aren't afraid to do so. I mean, that's a sheriff? Now, usually in law enforcement circles, you get people who understand more than most why people have a right to defend themselves. They at least understand that they can't be everywhere at all times, that they are minutes away when seconds count. Okay, here's the sheriff talking.
If you're an elected official and you want to keep things the way they are and not do things differently, if you want to keep the gun laws as they are now, you will not get re-elected in Broward County.
Now that's not a normal sheriff. And I can't prove this, but I do believe that he sacrificed those kids because it served his political agenda. Issuing a stand-down order and maximizing the damage that the shooter did would have worked to his political advantage. He has motive, and frankly, he hasn't kept his political opinions and aspirations very secret. And there's also a cultural problem in this whole area, in which police don't police. There are two counties. There's Broward County, where the shooting actually took place, and there's Miami-Dade County, which is just to the south of it, where Miami is. In both of these two counties, they have policies to try and, that, in effect, make it very difficult for arrests to take place with minors, with kids. Now, it started off sounding kind of sensible, and that was when the policy was that the law enforcement wouldn't get involved when the school system found minor crimes, such as trespassing, harassment, alcohol, that sort of thing. The sort of thing that when most of us went to school, the school board would have then called, or the school system, should I say, would have called the parents, and the parents would have dealt with the kid. Those cases. And I can understand not wanting those cases to, have this sort of school-to-prison pipeline, as it's often called. I get that. But then this instant pardon system gradually expanded. And we weren't talking about a kid with alcohol anymore. We were talking about burglary and assault. Things that everybody agrees are crimes, and that the police ought to be involved in. And the kids learned how much they could get away with, and kept pushing that boundary. And there was political pressure to lower crime. But instead of actually lowering crime, what the system did was prevented crimes from actually being put down as crimes, being pushed forward. They didn't actually prevent the crime. They just didn't prosecute the crime. And so you'll see headlines like, Miami-Dade County reduces juvenile delinquency by 60%. And this is a common confusion, but juvenile delinquency is not truancy. It's not just them staying out of school, it's them actually committing crimes. But stuff like that. And it makes it sound like somehow the crimes by these kids, or these minors, have been reduced. But they haven't. They weren't being reduced, they just weren't prosecuting them. They weren't going forward with dealing with these teenagers. Because of political pressure. These cops, or law enforcement, in these two counties have quotas. And they're not quotas in the way that you and I might think of quotas, which is when a cop is told you have to make X number of arrests. No. It's the opposite. They have inverse quotas. They have maximum quotas. You can't make more than a certain number of arrests this month. Criminals in the area, gangs in the area, found out about this quota system. And they started using teenagers to commit some of their crimes. And they started making the biggest criminal activities that they did at the end of the month, because this quota system happened on a monthly basis. It's insane. It's like this, they created in these two counties like this leftist utopia, where there are no crimes because we don't write them down, like this see no evil thing. Officers were conditioned and trained not to police. It created this entire culture where crimes aren't being dealt with. Trayvon Martin, you know, the kid who attacked the Hispanic Neighborhood Watch leader, Zimmerman, and who was shot as a result, we were told that he had a clean criminal record. He wouldn't have if it weren't for this system. He had burglaries. See, you don't just have this teenage boy, typically, who just goes and attacks somebody out of the blue, breaks his nose, makes him fear for his life, and then gets shot. That doesn't normally happen. That's one of the reasons that you had riots and protests. One of the reasons was because nobody believed that. Because you didn't have that. You had a teenage boy who had a record, or would have had a record, if they'd have bothered to write it down. And ultimately, them not prosecuting Trayvon Martin at any point for, say, burglaries, led to an escalation of his behavior, until nobody could ignore it, until he was dead. In a sense, it at least a worsening of crime everywhere, in these entire counties. Now this Sheriff Israel, is representative of the worst in our society. He still has not taken responsibility for his actions, for the actions of his deputies. Still. He was on this CNN town hall debate where he was saying to the NRA that they were responsible for not standing up for kids. He's responsible, and his deputies are responsible for kids actually dying. But he blames the NRA. Why? Because it appeals to his political agenda. That's it. Because he wants the Second Amendment repealed. Because he thinks that people don't have the right to arm themselves, the right to defend themselves even. And this sense of responsibility or lack of responsibility ties in with this concept of judging in our society. We live in a time where now it's become politically incorrect to judge someone else, even when he does something that's wrong. We just look the other way and maybe mumble, maybe you shouldn't have done that. But mostly what we say is, if he did that thing and it was wrong, it was because of some external outside force. It's not because he's a bad person, because he made a bad decision. It's because he grew up in a bad neighborhood, or he, had the wrong opportunity. We never blame the individual anymore. Being judgmental is a good thing. As long as you're being judgmental in the right thing, being judgmental keeps society healthy. Being judgmental is telling somebody right from wrong. We have something of an epidemic of kids who come from fatherless homes, or who just come from homes from parents who don't really care about them, who don't really raise them, who are raised by the school system, or by television. We need a society that is able to distinguish right from wrong, and that there are clear boundaries, clear expectations. And I've heard this. Some people like to point to the Bible as an excuse for this. And they say, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." I hear this all the time. by people who've never even read the rest of the passage. It's not about judging. It's about hypocrisy. And the passage goes on after that. It says, "For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged." In other words, don't judge somebody else for something that you yourself are doing. And we certainly have a problem with hypocrisy in our society. I mean, and it wouldn't make sense, biblically speaking. I mean, there's another passage that says, "Judge with righteous judgment." Right? Those two passages would be in utter conflict if it weren't for the fact that one is about hypocrisy and the other one's just about judging righteously. See, they actually work in tandem. But you have to know the whole passage. You hear people who really aren't Christian who say they judge not lest you be judged all the time. Lots of leftists like to use it so that they can say things like, it wasn't his fault, he was just raised in a bad home. People are individually responsible for the decisions that they make, and that's important on a societal level. On the left, you have this idea that there is no evil, and thus that every individual, because they're a good person, anything that they do that's bad is a result of somebody else. On the right, because you have, well, a more Christian group, you have people who understand this concept of evil. They know that evil exists. From some of the earliest age, they recognize evil. That some people are evil. We all have some degree of evil in us, the capacity for evil. But it's the choices that we make. Anyway, moving on for now about judgment. But the one officer who has been named, the one officer who stood outside whilst, shots were ringing, while kids were being killed, the one that's been named, he resigned with a full retirement. He wasn't fired. He retired. I can't even think of the words to express how kind of audacious that is. Now, this sheriff's department wouldn't protect the kids when they were when they had the opportunity to do so, when they should have been protecting the kids, but now they're protecting him. Now they're outside his home making sure that the parents of these 17, people who were killed, mostly teenagers, making sure that those parents don't do anything to him. Because they're worried about that guy when they weren't worried about the teenagers who were killed, who had their lives prematurely ended. Just think about that. Now, Donald Trump has proposed some things to try and help, to try and prevent things like this from happening in the future. One of those things is raising the age at which a person can get a gun. I'm strongly opposed to this. Granted, a 20-year-old today is not what a 20-year-old was 50 years ago. I'll give you that. I don't like millennials. I'm ashamed to be a millennial. Okay? But here's the thing. If an 18-year-old is old enough to enter our military and give his life for the country, then he's old enough to have a gun, to have the right to defend himself. He's old enough to move out or get kicked out by his parents and be forced to defend himself. There are lots of legitimate reasons that an 18-year-old will have a gun. And then it comes down to the most basic premise, which is that it's a right. And really it should end there. It says, shall not be infringed in the Second Amendment. It's a right. It's not, we can't just say, well, we think that, 21-year-olds are more mature than 18-year-olds. Of course they are. 30-year-olds are much more mature. I feel more comfortable with a 30-year-old having a gun. That doesn't mean that I think that only 30-year-olds have a right to have a gun. Because rights don't work like that. Now, I'd like to finish on a final point about some of the people from other countries who I see them throughout the internet, telling Americans how we don't have the same violence, or we don't have the gun massacres that you do, and therefore we're better. And I'd like to tell the Americans in the audience, they're not better. You, if you're a foreigner, do not have the right to lecture Americans about anything considered on the topic of rights or morality if in your country you don't have basic freedom of speech. You don't. Sorry, but you lost that right. It would be like lording free healthcare from inside of a prison. Congratulations on that. But you're still in a prison. It's like, no, you don't have massacres inside of North Korea. You also don't have freedom of speech or freedom of religion, freedom of privacy. None of these things. It's incredibly audacious. And that's even if we were to accept their false premise, that they don't have the same violence, and they do have the same violence. I mean, look at England. It increased. In the past year, their gun violence has increased by 20% in a nation that has made guns illegal. It's almost like the criminals don't obey the law. I mean, how did that happen? But even if they were right, even if in countries like England and Australia, the crime rate was lower, it would still be wrong. They would still be crappier countries than America is. Because if you live in a totalitarian state, yes, you have fewer massacres by people with guns because your people don't have guns. In the Soviet Union, you didn't have, school shootings by random people. No, I mean, throughout all the tyrannical places in the world, you don't have these. But you're also not free. It's also a crappy country. And I say that as someone who came from England. It's a crappy country. America is infinitely better because its people understand the concept of rights, and this is something that, as far as I'm aware, no other country seems to get. And I'll tell you something else. The Second Amendment is the reason why we have the rest of the rights. It's not a coincidence. The government is afraid to take the other rights away. The Second Amendment is what preserves the rights, the rest of them. Alright, that's all I have to say for now. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends. I'd appreciate it.
Health-wise.